Budget for Viksit Bharat. That's the tagline on ET Now to really capture the spirit of the budget. What can be done to ensure that the economic momentum continues? What needs to accelerate so that India can come back on the growth path once again? And what really needs to be ideated so that India or Indian economy is future ready at a time when global tariff regime really could haunt global growth? Having said that, the backdrop for this year's budget is strikingly different than what it was same time last year. Last year it was all about elections. This year it's all about global policy making, rupee, the dip in GDP growth, and the fact that there is no marked recovery in rural India per se. Government spending has been low. Will that make a comeback? And what really needs to be done that the volatility in the capital market, which also came largely because of the drop in F&O volumes and the change in the tax regime, that in a sense also goes away. Now let's take that conversation forward with the top brass of CII. We are now joined by Mr. Sanjeev Puri, President CII and Chairman ITC, Mr. Rajiv Memani, President-elect CII and Chairman and CEO of EY India, and Mr. R. Mukundan, Vice President CII and Managing Director and CEO of Tata Chemical. Gentlemen, so nice to have all of you on ET Now. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Puri, I guess my introduction was the question in itself. The backdrop for this year's budget is strikingly different. What, to your mind, should be the focus of the Finance Minister in terms of specifics? What, to your mind, needs to be done in the near term to address the challenges which are currently surfacing up when it comes to the visible slowdown in the economy?
Thank you, Nikunj, for having us on the show. So first of all, I think that it's very clear that the economy is on a strong foundation. Although the growth rates have been a little softer last quarter, but then there have been certain transient factors at play as well. And we should also look at it from a context of the global situation. In that context, I think the numbers of 6.4% and CII estimates between 6.4 to 6.7 for the year, I think it's a pretty good number. So we have a good starting position, and really I think we expect in the budget to continue the process of reform, continue to look at the next steps to be taken to really unlock the potential so that we can get to a kind of an 8% or beyond kind of growth rates. And what CII is recommending is, of course, focus on the next generation of reforms. It's focusing on continued focus on inclusive and sustainable developments, which means investments to fuel growth and employment. We're really talking about targeted measures for certain employment intensive sectors, MSMEs, dial up focus on skilling, and also stay within the fiscal glide path, but not to compress it more than what's been articulated. And also, investments to deal with this issue of climate change. So we're looking at the budget really taking the next steps for inclusive and sustainable development, and really building on where the last budgets have left it.
Mr. Memani, there are two big pockets of cracks which are visible. One, the government spending has not really been up to the mark in terms of what they indicated versus where we are likely to close the fiscal at. What do you think needs to be done to accelerate the government spending, and can it really be accelerated before the year ends to meet this year's target? That's part A. Part B, Mr. Memani, is of course the rural economy, where acceleration is still very limited and restricted. So what can really be done to ensure that the rural economy really comes back on track?
Nikunj, obviously the expenditure number will be important, but in that, I would say the capex spend is something that we should look at more carefully, because the multiplier impact of that is very high. So I think this last year, the government had projected some 11,70,000 crores. We don't think that number will be achieved unless there is massive spend in the last 2-3 months. But obviously the spend has accelerated significantly in the last few months. And therefore having a healthy growth in that will be very, very critical. On the rural end, yes, the spend should be there, but the rural economy has showed up better in the last 3, 4 months, 5 months. If you look at the agricultural growth, if you look at rural consumption, it's getting a bit stronger, especially with a good monsoon, a good kharif crop, and hopefully a good rabi crop. I think the rural demand, rural consumption should be higher. I think what we should also focus on is on urban consumption. And I think if the government can provide some relief, especially to the lower to middle income taxpayers, in terms of lowering the personal income tax rates in those slabs. I think that will also provide good relief to spur consumption. Even that may not come directly from the expenditure side of the budget. That may come because of foregone revenues, but I think that will also be very helpful.
Mr. Mimani, the setting on the table, like you just indicated and articulated, seems to be encouraging from a government standpoint. Fiscal deficit is coming under control. The direct tax mobilization has been above mark. The high frequency indicators like GST collection also have been pretty encouraging. So do you think we could really be in for some kind of a surprise this year from the budget, at least on the personal taxation front? Because on the personal taxation front, the tax rates in India, if not the highest, are certainly very high if I compare with global averages.
So if I can break your questions into 3 parts, I would say that I'm pretty sure that the government will maintain the fiscal glide path. I think we have seen even through elections and everything else, this government has done a phenomenal job of actually ensuring that there is fiscal prudence and they're following the macroeconomic glide path, which is so important for all other parameters, especially in a very volatile global economy, some of which you mentioned upfront. So I would say that will be there. Also, if the personal tax benefits have to come, I think they have to look at maybe other forms of revenue acceleration, whether it's through disinvestments, whether it's through national monetization pipeline. I think they will have to look at that. And I do believe that if the government is spending more on capex and is also providing relief to lower and middle income, I definitely think that will give a very strong GDP growth rate, which will hopefully help in and a stronger revenue buoyancy, tax buoyancy. I think that hopefully will give a good fillip to the overall sort of tax revenues. And if I look at last 2-3 years, actually the actual revenue collected has been more than the budgeted. So the tax buoyancy has been very strong, especially on the personal income tax front. The third thing, Nikunj, is I don't think the Indian tax rates are the highest, but definitely what has happened is that the full brunt of the inflation has been borne by lower to middle income, whether it's food inflation, whether it's in other segments like health and education, travel, other places where costs have gone up. And to cope, to ensure that there is enough economic space for the lower to middle income to consume as they rightfully should, and to also ensure that there is greater equity. I think that's probably, in my view, where the maximum amount of relief should be given.
Mr. Mukundan, the government spending has managed to create a multiplier effect. And within that, if I look at the sequencing, first there was focus on Atmanirbharta or Atmanirbhar Bharat. So government started spending a lot on defense, railways, PLI and manufacturing. Now, since government is doing all the heavy lifting, which are the new themes, sectors or sunrise sectors which to your mind now really need to be prioritized so that job creation happens, the government spending is absorbed, and that creates an accelerated impact or a multiplier effect in terms of the economy moving in the right direction?
Great suggestion, Nikunj. Firstly, thank you for having us on this session. Firstly, I think our view has remained that government should continue its focus on infrastructure because it has the highest multiplier effect. I think that should not come at the expense of something else. Having said that, I think there are lots of sectors which have shown positive trend, like renewable energy, electronics. I think we should continue the momentum, positive momentum in those sectors, and specific targeted push in those sectors certainly will help us to move forward in a real positive manner. The second piece which I wanted to highlight is, this piece about boosting private investment. I think what we did see in CII Snap poll, which we conducted in the NC very recently, is that there is really a 48% of the respondents, CEOs, felt that their investment will be higher. There'll be better investment activity going forward in H2 than in H1. And I think that positive momentum sentiment must be supported in equal measure by the budget in terms of ease of doing business and also cost of doing business, which we have made substantial improvement, but we must continue to make improvements on that front.
Well, there is every reason to believe that the continuity would be maintained, but ultimately it comes down to the fact that how this year's budget would be different from last year's budget, because the backdrop is different. And I would just elaborate this question for the benefit of our viewers. When the backdrop in 2021 was to stabilize the economy as it was recovering from COVID. The backdrop in 2022 and 2023 was to really kickstart the multiplier effect in the economy, and government did that brilliantly by increasing their expenditure. What to your mind should be the backdrop this year, and how do you think this year, which is 2025, will be different from last couple of years?
So let me start first by just adding on to the question that you had asked, Mukundan. I thought I'd also mention that in terms of focus, as far as spends are concerned, it would be useful to strengthen spends in the rural economy, and particularly things like, irrigation. Can we go at a saturation approach and have 80% penetration by, say, 2030? That will have a lot of multiplier effects. Now, coming to your question, see here, I think what is important. See, first of all, let me say it's about really building on the strong position we have. And the focus right now of this budget around the theme of inclusive and sustainable development has to be about revitalizing or providing fresh impetus to segments that can actually that have high labor intensity, and also to deal with some of the global challenges that we are facing right now, which I will speak about. And third is also to deal with certain very critical climate change related issues that we are facing right now. So coming to the first one, as far as employment generation is concerned, see, we have seen a resurgence of manufacturing in certain sectors, and Mukundan alluded to some of them. What is required now is to get momentum into sectors that have high labor intensity, like footwear, apparel, furniture, and so on and so forth. Or tourism, in fact, it's doing well, but there is immense opportunity there. So how can we provide targeted measures for these sectors? For example, tourism will gain by infrastructure status. For example, the apparel sector or footwear sectors will gain by the next generation reforms like labor code. They will gain by, India signing FTAs, and they will also be provided impetus if we can have a appropriate PLI equivalent kind of scheme for that sector. So that's one part of it. The other piece of employment generation, the backbone, is MSME. And how do we kind of strengthen MSME? From an ease of doing business, there is the Samadhan portal and there are many other portals. But what we are suggesting, can we create an integrated platform and connect all the business and the financial linkages to one platform for ease of doing business? The ECLGS scheme, that is a credit guarantee scheme, was very successful, and credit is an important component of MSME success. Can that scheme be brought in 2.0 version of it? Then connected to that, all of this is also this whole thing about integrating into global value chain. 70% of the global trade is in global value chain. So how do we integrate into that? What needs to be done? So there, CII is recommending a three-tier duty structure. And we're also saying very clearly that we must have a sectoral specific investment, trade, and infrastructure policy. And all of this aligned to the three-tier duty structure also, which has to be sector specific. Of course, there could be some exceptions to it. So these are some very important areas to focus as far as employment generation is concerned. And we also need to cognize for the fact that a large component of employment workforce for foreseeable future will remain in the agriculture sector. So dealing with the challenges in that sector, one is, of course, we have this challenge of productivity, but now the onslaught of climate change. So their CII is suggesting creating a national commission on agriculture resilience and adaptation, because the climate change is going to get worse before the temperatures cool down. We're also suggesting a national mission on water security, because that's another resource that is becoming critical, and a lot of economic activity is dependent on that. So these are some important facets as far as growth and employment is concerned. We also need to address some of the global challenges that are being faced right now on account of the external sector. We are seeing excess capacity, particularly in China, where stocks are being dumped all over the world, and they're also finding their way into India. That is impacting. That's a headwind for investment. It creates a lack of opportunity for Indian manufacturers. So we need mechanisms, and I must say that the policymakers are cognizant and extremely supportive of this issue. But we need certain mechanisms that can enable quicker action on all of this before a lot of damage is done to the industry, because this also delays investment. So this I think these are some of the areas that require special focus. But at the end of this, it's really building onto prior budgets. It's not that it's dramatically different. It's really building on the foundation in the context of the next steps that are required for the economy to grow and thrive.
Mr. Mukundan, since you mentioned the CII survey, what is the CII survey indicating in terms of the ease of doing business? While there is a lot of progress which has happened in the right direction, some would also argue that the progress is slow. A lot has been done, but still a lot needs to be achieved.
That reflects the ground reality, Nikunj. I think fundamentally what has happened is a lot of the action has shifted to states. And I think we need to now, while the ease of doing business at the central level has gathered momentum, is continuing in the positive direction, what we are recommending is a dedicated cell in each of the elements of the regulatory framework, which works not only with center, but also with states to enable them to make the transition. In fact, one of the suggestions we have made is that in many of the areas which cut across, I think to form GST council type dedicated process by which we are able to arrive at a consensus to drive change. Many of us, in effect, actually could do better investment, faster investment on the ground, if at the state level and if at the local level, if the ease was much more than what it is today. So it really is a process of deepening of the reform rather than changing the direction of reform. And that is really what has come out in our engagement with our members. And government has taken steps to engage with few of the states, but I think we need to bring all the states in. And it is in their interest, because investments will continue to flow to those states where ease of doing business is high. So if we have to have a balanced growth, which Sanjeev highlighted, sustainable growth, we need to do this together as one team. And that being one India, one team is extremely critical today.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.